Hello to everybody in the LinkedIn Live audience and welcome to this month's live panel debate. I'll be your host, Claire Muscat, and I'm the very proud founder of Women in CX, the world's first online membership community for women in customer experience. So before I introduce today's topic and my very esteemed guests, I'd love to know two things in the chat. Number one, where in the world are you joining us from today? And secondly, what's your go-to CX metric? So please do feel free to get involved in the chat and let's get this conversation going now. So in the background, I've got my amazing team supporting me on the live stream. Meg's here with me coordinating the chat backstage. Mia's managing the technology and Harley's going to be supporting you on the LinkedIn live chat. So I'm sure she'll be popping up to say hi. So just to tell you a little bit more about what we do, for anyone that's not familiar with Women in CX, or WiCX as we're known, we started out as a podcast during the pandemic in 2020 as a platform for women to share their career stories, experiences, and ideas about customer experience. And we became a startup community on International Women's Day 2021. We co-designed the community together with our founding members, with our mission being to unite women across the globe to collaborate, inspire, and support one another. And now, just shy of 1 year on, our community spans over 50 countries with access to a private social media network, networking events, guest webinars, member-led masterclasses, and case studies, plus a whole resource library of exclusive content to help our members flourish both personally and professionally. And we're really on a mission now to amplify the voices of women in our industry, hence taking what was previously a roundtable discussion that happened inside the community live to you, our audience here on LinkedIn today. So just as a reminder, today we're going to be discussing how to translate data into meaningful insights and action. But before we start, let's see who we've got in the chat. Oh, in India, retention's the key KPI from Sangeeta. In Samantha in Trinidad and Tobago, doesn't have a go-to metric, really depends on what the client needs. Kiki, I'm not sure where you're from, but your top metrics ESAT. Great CX comes from great EX. Totally agree with that one. Okay, we'll come back to the chat in a second, but I was going to give us a little overview of what we're going to be talking about today. So to get us started, with today's digital economy driving ever increasing footprints of data about customer behavior, satisfaction and experience, we've got more information available to support decision making than ever before. However, despite advances in technology and analytics, progress on translating data into meaningful insight and action is still lacking in customer experience, as evidenced by the fact that so many organizations are still not managing to get the basics right when it comes to what matters most to customers. But what exactly is causing the gap? Have we got our priorities wrong when it comes to what we do with the data? Has the obsession with measuring everything in CX led to data overwhelm? Is managing and collecting CX data overriding the focus on good customer experience management? Could metrification of CX actually be driving the wrong behaviours? And are measures like NPS actually eroding or improving CX as a discipline? So we're going to be discussing all of that today. So I'm about to be joined by my amazing panel of expert guests from the Women in CX community, who are going to be bringing their experience to the table to discuss the challenges faced by organisations who are striving for better customer experiences. And we're here to debate the merits of different measurement frameworks, tools, and technologies, and provide practical advice on tips on translating CX data into meaningful action. So to the audience, we'd love you to get involved by commenting in the chat, asking questions. And yeah, just so you know, our final 15 minutes are going to be dedicated to asking your questions to our panel too. So without further ado, please welcome on stage our CX queens, Mary Drummond, Chloe Woolger, Adwoa Asari Asamoah, and Steen Ringvig Marshall. Hi, ladies.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, everybody.
How are you all doing?
Good. Great.
Yeah, now I managed to get mute off. We're ready to go. Always the way. So just to get us warmed up then, if you ladies wouldn't mind introducing yourselves and tell us a little bit more about what you do and where you're from. And I'm going to start at the top with Mary. Take it away.
Hey everybody, good morning. It's morning here where I am in Atlanta, Georgia in the USA, and I am the Chief Marketing Officer for WiCX. And I'm also host of the Voices of CX podcast. It's a podcast on customer experience. I've had Claire as my guest and a whole bunch of other amazing women and practitioners, and I'm really excited to be here today.
Awesome. Thanks, Mary. And Edwella?
Hi everyone, I am Ajua Asare Asamoah. I am from Ghana. Ghana is an Anglophone country in West Africa. I am the head of CX in CalBank PLC. My role is to drive the bank's service culture and leverage on customer insights to improve on customer experience and customer satisfaction. I've been in CX for 4 years. However, I've been in the banking industry for almost 20 years. I'm also happy to be here and I'm looking forward to an engaging discussion. Thank you.
Oh, super happy to have you here as well. And yeah, we've got a few people joining from Botswana, Trinidad, the USA, and Yvonne from Ghana as well. I'm sure she's here to support you, especially. So Chloe, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. So I'm Chloe. I'm the commercial director at Kantar. Kantar are one of the founding sponsors of Women in CX. So really pleased with all the work that we do with Claire and all the fantastic stuff we're doing across the community at the moment. So good to be here for that today. But also in my other part of my day job, I work with a range of different brands, helping them really think about how they can use customer feedback and really turn it into an exceptional experience. So quite often we call it understanding customers' true voice to make sure that we really know what customers are saying and how brands can action that.
Awesome. And last but not least, Steed.
Hi, thank you for inviting. My name is Stine, if you want to say it really the Danish way. I'm by background a sociologist, so I have a lot to say about methodology. But I have like 15 plus years of operational experience from three of the top Danish brands within the experience industry, Copenhagen Zoo, Tivoli, and Copenhagen Airport. And now I run a Scandinavian community for practitioners of CX. And I have experience management academy that I'm building to make learning about CX more accessible to everyone.
Awesome. Thank you, ladies, for the intro. So we've got a rather international panel going on here. So we've got the USA, Africa, we've got the UK and Europe. So I think I'd just love to hear a little bit more from each of you around where the current state of play is as you see it for where you are, your industry or your country. So Mary, what's going on in the USA and particularly in the technology space?
Well, USA tends to always kind of, I'm going to say, lead the forefront when it comes to technology. A lot of the technology starts here and then spreads out or starts in other parts of the world, but is adopted really early on here. So I feel like there is the eyes of the whole globe are on us when it comes to leading the way with the technology. It's also the biggest market for customer experience in the world. And we've been doing it here for a long time. So I think that we have a really important job of staying ahead of the market and not getting caught up in things of the past or getting stuck with tradition. That's something that I tend to see often in customer experiences. A lot of individuals get really fixated on their original way of doing things and then have a really hard time being open-minded to look at what technology and innovation is bringing to the space. So that's one thing that I'm going to challenge everybody here to do. I know that we have some really controversial topics that we're going to bring up. So my challenge is be open-minded. Let's look to the future instead of to the past in order to pave the best journey possible for our customers.
Love it. And Chloe, you work with a lot of FTSE 100 organisations. What's your view from the UK?
Yeah, I mean, look, probably fairly similar to the US, really, in the sense of there's a lot coming out of the CX space at the moment. I mean, we know most organizations are drowning in data. I think that most organizations are trying to swim, but definitely drowning. So that still hasn't changed over the last few years, has it? I mean, we've been seeing that for a long time. So I think it's about organizations really understanding how they can use that data to really know their customers inside out and really think about, okay, well, if I do know my customers inside out, how are we going to change the experience we can deliver? So I think that's something across the UK that we're seeing, that need for more personalization, I'd say. So really delivering a personalized experience that has the customer at the heart. And whilst, across Kantar, we see a lot of organizations doing that right, there is still a huge experience gap. So it's really about thinking, how can you close that gap and get everyone on board?
I'll definitely be asking you that question again later. How to close that gap. So, Joelle, representing Ghana and also, I guess, like financial services as a practitioner, what's the state of play where you are?
Well, COVID accelerated digital transformation in the financial industry, and which brought CX. So I must say that though CX is quite new in the area, it's gained prominence, and I'm foreseeing innovative ways of using data in the future. Yeah.
Okay. And Steen, so representing, I suppose, Denmark, and making you represent the whole of Europe as well. But I'm sure you must hear a lot from your community members about the Nordics. What's going on where you are?
Right. I think one of the things that is going on, and I think that's not just in the Nordics, but organizations sometimes struggle with, they have two types of data. The type of data that I, at least as a CX person, really would like, the stuff you can create change, from. And then there's the other type of data, which is, I call it cover my back data, that is just about, measuring, did I do my job right? And the drowning in data really comes from a lot of the latter. And I think sometimes it's difficult for organizations to sort of, you mentioned it, Chloe, swim, because there's so much data. So what is relevant? So I think a lot of organizations are basically struggling to shave down the information they have and focus on what is exactly the right thing to do. And the reason that's important, obviously, is if you want to create a better bottom line based on the customer experience you deliver, it also takes a little bit of thought as to how can I do that with the least possible effort, right? So really separating those two types of data from each other is something that a lot of the CXs that I'm in contact with in my community are struggling with when going, to top management and suggesting initiatives and things.
So if I go like a bit round robin, really around the room, what are the kind of go-to CX tools that are most popular where you are? So Mary, hit me. What's yours?
Well, I think that it's kind of divided between technology and methodology. And those are two things that are really separate, because the big technology platforms here that essentially digitized pen and paper surveys are the big players in the market, and they have a lot of traction. So picking which platform, I don't think is really that important. But what people are still focused on, I think, is net promoter, customer satisfaction, and then a new arrival that people tend to be focusing on a lot is customer effort score. There are, of course, other individual metrics. There are plenty of large organizations that have their own metrics that they have built, either chance of repurchase or share of wallet and other things like that. But what we tend to see a lot of truly is a focus on recommendation potential and satisfaction.
Is anyone any different than that, or any to add to supplement?
I think I just agree with Mary there by saying, that the technology is absolutely only the enabler. It's what you do with that data that's really important. And I think it's also about thinking, how do you use tools to actually predict customer behavior as well? Because there's one thing measuring, but actually what you want to be doing is really predicting what your customers want, and so that then you're delivering really sort of targeted experiences as well.
Yeah, and I think if I can add something to this, just a lot of organizations, they sorry, I lost my thread there. You said something really bright. I want to
I was just
I'll get back to it.
We were just asking about what are the kind of go-to CX metrics are where you are.
Right.
Like, was there any? Yeah.
Right. Sorry. Can I interrupt again then?
Go for it.
I think one of the challenges is that a lot of organizations, when they talk about data, they talk about quantitative data, which, you can do a lot with, but forgetting, to enrich it from other data sources than that one that is the cheap one or the new technology one that you bought that you love, forgetting to enrich your data with observation. Like, we all know there's stuff you can ask and you will get an answer, but it's not necessarily always that answer, right? So enriching your data from several sources, and it really doesn't have to be expensive to do that.
And also that could be any sources as well. I think people forget a lot of the time. We mentioned employee experience there, but bring employee,
Right.
your employees are the ones on the front line. They're the ones seeing your customers day in and day out. Bring their feedback in and blend that with your customer data, but also think about brand tracking data, think about financial data, think about outcomes. How can you use all of this to try and create a better understanding of your customers? Because if you just use feedback data on its own, you're not going to get close enough.
It's interesting what you said, Chloe, when you talked about predicting customer behavior. And I think that the interesting thing there is that many companies were absolutely onto this with the idea of predicting customer behavior. And it seems like the best way to do that is with predictive analytics. The problem is that predictive analytics look at historic data to predict future behavior. And when you've got something like COVID, which is something that we're just coming out of, that absolutely throws a wrench. And essentially what it does is it wipes the slate clean, where any historic data that we had prior to the pandemic is no longer relevant. So companies are just starting to accumulate enough new data to begin creating a couple predictive analytics about the future. And the problem is that the market is so fast these days that by the time you've got those predictive algorithms in place, it's already changed again. So we have to find a way to be ahead of our customers without using historic data. So instead of looking at cold data at the past, we need to find a way to start taking advantage of hot data in order to create experiences that our customers truly want in the present.
And
that's
also
a great point.
to add from where we spoke about the employee experience. So most of the time we lose sight of the importance the employee experience brings to the customer satisfaction, especially when it comes to process optimization and customer journeys. The employees at the front line have loads of information that we can leverage to improve on our processes and to give the customers the satisfaction they desire. Yeah.
Is there a dominant kind of CX metric happening in Ghana or Africa more broadly? Is there anything that is a bit more of a go-to for everybody?
Yeah, so we have the situation where we create our own metrics depending on the challenge or depending on the area that you are researching in. But then customer effort score also comes in strongly here, especially when you're looking at contact centers and frontline activities and all that. But most of the time, you would see institutions having their own metrics. Yeah.
So satisfaction and recommendation, ones like that, are all kind of consistently coming across the board. I'm just going to read out some of the comments from the chat if anyone's not seen these yet. So Yvonne's talking about the management teams want to get data back so they can back up the decisions that are being made. I know there was some vehement agreement about the metrics that are needed just to protect yourself should the proverbial hit the fan. Also, I think we had another one here from Kiki talking about like voice of customer, but using it to tell complete and compelling stories, or you can actually read it yourself down there. But yeah, awesome comments coming through. But yeah, like being able to align it with the OKRs and ensuring that the customer actually has a seat at the table in these meetings is super important. So thanks everyone for carrying on in the comments. So Jen King's agreeing with you, Chloe, that a holistic view is the best way to see the entire picture. So yeah, please do keep commenting in the chat. We'd love to know what your thoughts are as well. So just moving us on then. So the killer question of the hour that typically is dividing the CX industry at the moment is the one regarding how effective Net Promoter Score is in driving customer experience. So ladies, I'm going to ask for a vote. do you think that NPS is either eroding or improving CX? So have you got any votes for it improving CX? Raise your hand. Oh, two semi ones. And I'm guessing, Mary, Chloe, you're thinking it's eroding customer experience management. Okay, well, I want to dive a little bit deeper into to understand your reasons why on that then. So I think let's go to Mary first. Why is it eroding customer experience in your opinion? And
Well,
please get involved in the chat now, audience. We'd love to know your vote. Is it eroding or improving?
I have been known as an anti-NPS militant in the past, and I'm going to tone that down a little bit. My first thing is that the work that has been done with Net Promoter has helped voice of customer become popular around the globe. And that's really, really important because it was a simple, objective way of looking at customer feedback and providing a number that either the board or the shareholders could use to measure how the customer was being valued within the operations of an organization. So that being said, it truly started with really good intentions, and the brilliant ladies and gentlemen behind the Net Promoter System at Bain really did some amazing work, and it was very, very advanced at its time when it came out. The problem is that as all good things, they become corrupted after a while. And most companies out there that are using Net Promoter Score or the Net Promoter System aren't doing it properly, to a degree where Bain has had to put out several different updates and actually basically eliminate the customer, the Net Promoter Score, and start using earned value as a new metric because it's so far gone that they can't even pull it back. And one of the main issues is attributing employee bonuses to Net Promoter Score, which absolutely corrupts the essence of the metric to begin with. Yeah. So I think that what has happened is that we've gone so far in the wrong direction to a point where there's no auditing, there's no way to observe how accurate those scores are. And so little is being done to actually take action in the true essence and value of Net Promoter, which is in the second open-ended question, that I think that we need to go for a total rehaul. I don't think that there's any way of going back and fixing it. This part, it's way too far gone. So I do believe that the Net Promoter System is a very complete system and really good. And for organizations that work alongside, Bain and company to use and set up a Net Promoter Score within the correct parameters of the metric in which it was designed, I say, hey, keep doing that. It's a fantastic job with phenomenal individuals behind it. But for those of you who aren't and who are kind of going rogue, I would suggest taking a good hard look at your strategies and possibly reconsidering.
Nice. And we'll come back a bit more to the conversation around the behaviors that some of these metrics drive shortly. But Chloe, you were a nay as well. What's your thoughts on the CX debate of the century, I think it is now?
It's a great debate, one that constantly comes up, isn't it? Look, and very similar to Mary, I completely agree. I think it's a great system. It definitely has its merits. And look, I started out on the customer service front line with one of the big automotive dealer groups, and it was great. However, there was a lot of gaming going along because we were all focused on the score. We were all bonused on the score. Everything was around. And when that score wasn't right, it was a huge challenge. So that's why obviously gaming and those behaviors that you don't want to drive to employees to create, that's why it happens. So I think the biggest thing is about thinking that you absolutely need a metric structure. You need a number because the board needs that. You need to report that back to the city. That absolutely needs to be there. But it's the rest of the feedback you're getting. It's that open-ended feedback that you really need to be concentrating on and thinking that's what's going to drive action. And if you get too hung up on the NPS score, you don't do that, and you just focus on that number rather than actually what the customer wants. So a lot of the work I do is sort of helping organizations center around having sort of a common customer vision and a central goal of what the customer is, so that everyone within the business is brought in. Yes, that will have a reference to score, but that won't be what it is. This is about what do you want to stand for customer experience? What does your brand want to deliver? How are you going to get there? And the metric really isn't going to help you do that. So as good as it is, just focus on other things as well. Keep the board happy, make sure you're feeding that number through. But as CX professionals, that's not where your time should be spent.
And Sangeeta's just saying that you're absolutely talking about her situation. So super relevant and on point for what's going on in the industry. So let's go to our kind of pros. I could sense there's a bit of reticence to go all the way. It's improving customer experience. But Steve, what are your thoughts?
Well, I don't think you can. Well, the good bits are that it's well, let me just comment on some of the stuff that's being said. For me, NPS is a tool. If you use it wrong, you don't hit the nail into the wall. So basically, it all depends on how you use it. If you're focused on the score alone, you're missing the point. And the reason I'm lukewarm is not because of anything flawed. It's because I'm against using any single source of data as your only source of data. Someone in the chat asked, what other data could be enriching. And so I use the Net Promoter Score, not the score, the comments. The one biggest comment of the negative of the detractors, combined with employee feedback. Which situation in your everyday life comes up every day, several times, that bothers you and is creating what is a difficult customer situation? Combined with looking at complaints, combined with observing customer behavior. So I'm never going to say there's one method that is, making CX climb or erode. It's all about using that data correctly. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people are a little bit like kids with machine guns. They have the data, but they don't know how to use it. They were never trained in understanding and driving change based on data. And I think that is the problem, not the Net Promoter Score system as such. The problem is that too many people, care about not the right things when they use it. So that's why I was like this. I don't love one method specifically, but I did drive significant change based on comments from the Net Promoter system.
Yeah, I think in your point there, it's not about the score, it's about the comments and the why and the reasons. I totally get that. But
I want to get back and comment on that as soon as Adjoa has her turn.
Well, no, I was just going to say, I think part of the problem there is marketing things as a silver bullet or something that is going to fix everything, and kind of the risk of consultants or others, kind of saying, if you buy this thing, it will fix all of your problems, but that not actually being the reality. So Adjoa, what about you? What do you have to say?
Stina said so much, and I'm happy that the naysayers actually acknowledged NPS before they discounted it. So I agree with Steen. NPS as a tool in itself does not improve customer experience or does not improve behavior. And in any customer insights program, you should have various tools to get the best out of the program. And then again, if you pick NPS gives you your advocates, gives you your detractors, gives you your passives. And I think you can get a lot from what your customers are saying. For instance, if you pick your advocates and you drill down further to ask why they are your advocates, there's a lot you can get from that question that you can use to improve what your customers say about, or why your customers are detractors or why your customers are passives. So I agree that it shouldn't be discounted, but then it shouldn't be used alone as a customer insights tool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think that my problem is it's a bit like saying oh, I like eggplant as long as it's soaked in salt and then laid out to dry and then fried until utter oblivion and then loaded with Parmesan cheese and marinara sauce, then I'll eat it. So that's kind of what my problem is. When you say this tool is useful, but only in this very specific manner, using this very specific way, for me, that subtracts from the validity of the tool. Because if you're going to be acquiring a tool and you're going to be using it in your whole organization, then pick the best tool. Pick the tool that's going to focus its efforts on the commentary. So let's remove that other part and just leave the commentary there and focus on digging into the open-ended voice of customer and exclude the rest of the part that isn't serving us at the moment.
Right. But as a tool, if you want to drive change with 1,500 customer-facing staff, explaining which comments means what to the organization and why is super easy with the Net Promoter Score system.
Mm-hmm.
Now, getting on board with why do we need to change? Why do we need to work on the customer experience is super easy to get that fuel for change when you are wanting to drive change in a large organization that is, complex in many different ways, have lots of different ways to analyze their stuff. And so, I mean, my experience is this worked. It worked for me. It worked great. It's not used as a bonus measure or anything. It was used to drive change, and as such, it's powerful.
Yeah. The problem that I see there is truly that what ends up happening is it was great. It was great when there were no alternatives to dig deeper into the raw voice of customer. But now we've got technology, we've got AI, we've got systems, we've got methods to do that. We've got ways to focus all of our efforts on technology that can be scalable and not require manual overview and tagging of open-ended responses. It's all done for you. So what ends up happening is that what is right now perhaps shadowed in NPS, which is the open-ended responses, we can go a lot deeper and get a lot more insight out of, which kind of eliminates the need for the rest of it. So my thing is, hey, technology over the past 10 years has advanced so much that it's taken us to a whole different standard. What happens before is, if you consider that the biggest companies in the world that met a terrible end and were essentially eliminated from the market within the past 10 years, all of them, well, not all of them, but a lot of them boasted really, really high net promoter scores or CSAT. A really, really good example of this is BlackBerry, that when it was at its peak of CSAT, where it had the most satisfied customers of all of the hardware for mobile phones out there, that was the year of its demise. So then you start asking yourself, were customers lying in their surveys? They were not. They weren't lying in their surveys. The problem is that the right questions weren't being asked. So the data that they were answering within those limited set of questions was not enough to capture where customers' expectations and needs were headed. And that was the end of BlackBerry. So I think that what we need to try focusing on now is the blind spots that are caused by these metrics that are really, really popular at the moment. Again, it's not subtracting, it's adding. Like you said, it's having more than one data source. It's having more than one way to be able to identify what those needs and expectations are.
Right. But what fits exactly, I think, also depends what organization you're talking about, and what data collection is possible, when and how, and all of that.
Absolutely.
But so I'm not on the eroding train.
There's a great comment in the chat actually now that just says exactly the same. It's not going to be a magic pill to serve CX issues. Everyone thinks about NPS. There it is there. What does an organization actually do? And I think that's the big thing. Whilst we could really debate the metrics for so long, and we really would, we could do like 2 or 3 hours
all day.
on this. But it's really about, what does that organization actually do with the data? Whatever data that is, how do they use it to improve? And that's what's really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm going to move us on a little bit away from the question that could keep us entertained, I'm sure, for a whole year, to start to delve a little bit deeper into the fact that I think we're acknowledging that kind of customer experience has become an entity in a way that has been metrified, as I call it, where there's been so much pressure to try to prove ROI that actually the measurement aspect of it has become quite the focus to some degree. And listening to you ladies, kind of debating the pros and cons of multiple different approaches, strategies and frameworks, the challenge that having a metrics focus on CX rather than an action or insights focus is that it can drive some pretty bizarre behaviors. I think Chloe alluded to that already. So I thought I'd just ask what are the weirdest or funniest or just most meaningful examples that you've seen of the wrong behaviors coming out. I know for me it wasn't anything, it was back in the mystery shopper days, and I was working in supermarkets, and our store teams would obsess so much over spotting the mystery shopper and identifying them. They spent more time doing that and letting each other know than they did actually trying to improve the experience. So has anyone else got any little anecdotal examples of what behaviors can be driven by an over focus on the measurements?
Oh, Claire, mine's so similar. So when I was working in one of the automotive dealer groups, I got mystery shopped. I thought I was really good at spotting them as well. I thought I could absolutely work. And could I with this person? No, of course not. And it wasn't the greatest. So I think it's absolutely, thinking about, okay, there are going to be situations where, people are going to game them. They are going to think about that. And you'll never really get away from that. But get that buy-in. If you can get people to people on the front line to understand why it's important, really engage everyone, make employees feel valued and make employees feel like they'll be empowered as well. Like, this is a good thing that you're grabbing this feedback, because they're going to be more empowered to better serve the customer. It's going to make their jobs easier. I think people forget that a lot.
And one thing that's abundantly common here in the US, especially in the automotive industries, is they will have giant signs, dealers saying, when you get the survey, if you're going to give anything other than a 9 or a 10, come and talk to us and we'll figure it out so that you don't give that score. And you're like, come on, like that destroys the whole premise of the metric to begin with. And every time I see it, it's hilarious, but it's also really, really sad.
Yeah, we've got like a whole load of memes going around on the community message board of like the different places we've seen the most inappropriate NPSs. Oh, Adora's just dropped off, I think.
She's here with audio. She had a problem with Wi-Fi.
Oh, video.
I have a good one I have to share, Claire.
Go.
Story. So I was in this conference place, right, going to the toilet. And so outside the toilet, when you come out, there's this, happy or not, the buttons like the green, red you can push. And on that one, it said, please let us know how you felt about your toilet visit, but do be aware that we have more than 100,000 visits in this toilet per year. So what, be kind to you because a lot of people poop here? Very weird, very weird.
That's hilarious. I know I was in hospital for a random reason, but it was in one of the waiting rooms. Like, would you recommend this emergency ward? Like, as if you ever would. As if you ever would.
Like, hey, if you're having an emergency, make sure to pick this hospital, not the one that's closest to you. No.
It's mental, actually mental. So yes, I think kind of that we know that there is this real kind of cultural challenge, isn't there? And focusing on the metrics is in some cases what people believe they have to latch onto in order to provide those numbers to defend ourselves or to prove the value of customer experience. But kind of bringing us back to this challenge around, driving action from the data as opposed to just creating the data in its own right. Is it because we've got our priorities wrong, do you think? Or is it, I think I see, all these amazing things that technology is enabling us to do with data, but it's very much being focused on how can we drive more revenue or cross-sell or upsell or that kind of thing. So Mary, I was going to ask you, like, kind of on the positive stance, like what innovations do you see and, helping us to solve this challenge where action is the focus as opposed to just creating the data itself?
I almost feel like this is a trick question, Claire, because a couple of months ago, I wrote an article said, what is your CX priority and are we getting it wrong? And I do have a pretty controversial point of view about it, because I think that as CX practitioners, as people in this industry, we're always so proud to talk about how empathetic we are and the capacity that we have with empathizing with customers. And that's great. But the truth is that we also have to be empathetic with the company's goals. And we also have to be empathetic with shareholder goals, because it's cyclical. It's something that goes round and round. Companies are for-profit organizations in most cases. So if we are forgetting what the company is there for in the first place, then we're not being too smart about the way that we do customer experience. Now, this doesn't mean sacrificing customer experience for profit. Not at all. It means understanding how customer experience is a growth metric. It's how experience aligns with revenue, with profit, with lower churn, with higher loyalty. But if we become so blinded that we believe in the romantic idea of hearts and flowers and butterflies when it comes to helping our customer, but we forget about the company that we work for, then our CX initiatives are absolutely going to fail. because it's not aligned. We're not aligned with the company's objectives. So there is, I tend to say that the middle way is always the way. And when it comes to finding something that will benefit customers and companies at the same time, that's the part that we truly need to focus our CX efforts. And I'm not saying that it's easy or simple or absolutely not a silver bullet. Absolutely not. But there is a way. And we just have to be mindful when we talk about, hey, customer experience has become so metrified. Oh, there's so much focus on ROI. There's a reason for that. And the reason is that the company needs to have profit. So, I mean, if we are able to keep that in mind when making our customer experience strategies, I think that we're going to be a lot more successful in our positions.
Just to clarify, I am not complaining that return on investment is the most important thing that we need to be able to do. I think it's just that the focus on the metrics, and the focus on the metrics, particularly for the frontline employees, is problematic rather than the focus on the action.
It is.
So,
I think I would say frontline is very problematic to begin with.
Yeah. So amen to that, sister. So Steen, thinking about your perspective as a sociologist, then we're talking about kind of how we can actually use data to drive things like strategies that are effective. Have you got any kind of points of view that you'd like to share at this point?
I mean, I think I shared the one that I have most to heart, which is, split your focus on measuring onto several channels. Choose whatever is right for you. And then, I mean, this is not the question you asked, Claire, but I'm just going to comment on what Mary said. I'm currently very vocal about this. Customer experience is not about the customer. It's about making a profit for the company you work for, because so many are, when they talk about CX, talking about, doing good in the world, and all of that is great. The flowers and butterflies, I like
the flowers and butterflies.
But it's just not what gets CX into the boardroom. I mean, it's not, so I just amen to what you just said. And I think one of the things that you said that can link to the question that Claire just asked is, once you start aligning the business goals, like look at what organization are you working for and what are the goals? Align that with the goal of the employees, which, it's also the business goals, but sometimes there's an identity or a reason why they work in this area that if you can tap into that, combine it with the customer's need, you create something truly magical because you align those different fields. So as a sociologist, I would recommend research your customers, research your company, and research your employees and find that golden spot in the middle, because that's where you're going to drive true change, true profit, and enhance what it is that you're doing with your CX program.
Absolutely.
And quite often, organisations don't do that. We see a lot of companies not having a clear CX vision, not relating it back to the business objectives where you said there, because that's really key. And I think, if you're going to embark on measuring, if you're going to embark on really wanting to get closer to your customers, don't forget that point. Like, that's the first thing you need to be doing. And it doesn't have to be that difficult. But if you want the business to be engaged with it, you've got to be clear about what you're trying to do.
Yeah. And then the other thing, honestly, just commenting on what you just said, a lot of businesses don't translate their strategy into what behavior is that for an employee on a Tuesday morning at 8:00 when I'm, scrubbing toilets in an airport. How do I deliver an exceptional customer experience? What is that, making that exercise, bottom up, but also top down.
Yeah.
Relevant
so
to everybody.
Scrubbing the toilets with the buttons to say whether or not you had a good experience.
That was not in the airport.
That would make me so concerned for pressing that button. I'd be like,
never coming back.
Maybe that's a strategy in its own right to like reduce the number of data points you have. So yeah, I suppose I think what we're kind of coming to you here is like metrics are part of customer experience. We can't do CX without them. Like the focus on them is a necessary evil to the extent that when it comes to talking to the senior leadership teams, it's critical that we're able to show on numbers and link, very importantly, anything to do with customer experience that drives business outcomes and objectives. We've talked about the fact that, this doesn't only come from being able to survey and get responses about incremental improvement or pain points that might be required. last month we talked a lot about the need for primary research to understand needs and motivations, and it's broader than just this subject. And if you're looking to develop an effective strategy that drives action, there's engagement at every level of the organization required, with not numbers but people and vision. And again, that's something that maybe is one of those sweet spots that in the future we need to be able to bring together this perspective that the whole company can understand, that wins hearts and minds. I'm not going to say butterflies and rainbows or whatever it was, Mary, that you said, but has the emotional drivers that people across the organization want to engage with, but also has the hard edge that the stakeholders and the cities and the people we need to report to also do as well. Yeah. So I'm going to say to the audience, have you got any questions that you want to ask? I've been loving the comments, reading I think there's a lot of there's some disagreement, which is always great for a panel, isn't it? We can't all think we've got exactly the same opinion, otherwise there won't be any point in having a panel. But how many of the ladies in the audience are kind of saying this really resonates with me, or you're talking about my current situation? So I think we really are on point here. So before we come to our audience for questions, so that's your cue to get your questions in the chat now, ladies, and if there are any gentlemen here as well, let's be gender inclusive. What would your final kind of thoughts on this subject be? If you wanted to leave the audience with one key message from you about where we are today or where we need to be going on this subject, what would you say, Mary?
So I would say that, I'm a vendor. What can I say? They're focusing on getting the right data is, I think, the most important thing that we're debating here, because no matter which methods or resources you have later on to interpret or translate or process that data, if you're getting bad data to begin with, then it's going to be bad responses coming out. So focus on, and I say this all the time and I feel like I'm becoming extremely redundant, but it's such a strong message, which is when you're soliciting feedback from your customers and they agree to give it, this is a gift. They're giving you their time. They're giving you their feedback, not because they want to bash you, but because they want you to do better. They want the relationship with you to work. So they're giving you the exact key points and the information that you need to know to keep doing better at the things you're succeeding at and stop doing the things that you're failing at. So being able to extract these two key elements really helps give you the North Star of where to focus your investment, where to prioritize, which experiences need urgent fixing because they can be deal breakers for customers. So being able to ask the right questions to begin with and shed your operation of the guesswork when it comes to trying to understand their customers, I think is crucial. Now, I'm not saying that I'm the best company to do that, but I'm definitely the best company to do that. So if you want to just connect with me on LinkedIn.
Shameless plug there, Mary. I value and appreciate that. Shameless. And Adwara, what's your final thought?
Yes. So to use a cliche that data is the new gold. Gold, to get the best out of gold, must be mined, must be refined, must be molded into something valuable. So in the same sense, customer data or customer insights must be mined, must be analyzed, and must be converted into something valuable. At the end of the day, it should create stakeholder value. So if we have our priorities right, it should contribute to the bottom line. It should create value for employees. And at the end of the day, it should create value for customers as well. And if we have it right, if we get it right, we will know the products to churn out that will give customers value. Yes. So that's customer data.
Nice.
Thank you.
We've got some really tasty questions coming up in a minute. So quickly to the other ladies. Chloe, final thought from you?
Yeah, I mean, I agree very much with what these ladies have said. I think, look, the future of customer experience is very, is very bright and rosy. I think it's really good. But I do think, as we will see it become more and more important, you've got to think about how you justify it. So as a role of a CX professional, I would say really think about how you're constantly showing that ROI, really show what it delivers to the business, relate that back, and connecting data, as we talked about earlier on, is a key part of being able to do that, because otherwise you are going to get to the position where everyone in the business is not on board, and you've got to keep fighting for that. We've got a tough job, CX professionals, I have to say.
But fight the good fight.
Let's
We
do
can do
it.
it. We've got this, girls. And Steve, your final thought?
Well, my final thought is, I'm going to not repeat what's being said, which was wise words. So you obviously need data to design something, but if you want to do it simple, like look at the data you have and don't think about, how you can create wow moments and excellent service and all of that. Just clean up, like basically get your broomstick and clean up. Like take the biggest complaint, the biggest detractor comment, the biggest negative comment you get in quality feedback, the biggest comment to the employees that you have at the front line about what is difficult with the customers, and eradicate just one issue at a time. Focus on that one issue, get that done, and then move on to the next. That's my final thought on that one.
And actually, in my experience, having spent all the time I did on the business side, that's actually how you prove ROI. You fix something, you prove the value of it, and then people do start to buy in. So with all the measures in the world, actually getting focused on action yourself, not asking for or waiting for permission or big investments, just cracking on and fixing something that will have a business benefit to it is the way to get your stakeholders on board. So we've got a question. So Bryony is posing a really interesting one. So, a lot of the time these conversations are shaped by B2C, aren't they? Like thinking about big customer bases where things like retail or hospitality or whatever are selling directly to consumers. But Bryony's question is about what kind of metrics you could use for monopoly or public sector companies where people don't actually have an alternative, might be tied in like utilities, for example, or hospitals, the nearest one in emergency, to ensure that people are going to get the service that they need. And how can we make sure that we're giving them a good experience without necessarily having a comparable benchmark available? Who would like to volunteer to take that? Oh, Steen's got a finger up. Yeah, go for it, girl.
Right. So I worked at the Copenhagen airport, which is, an airport isn't a monopoly, but it's certainly somewhat of a monopoly in its area, at least this one. And actually, I used Net Promoter Score, but in a pirated version. So I didn't ask, would you recommend other people to go through the security check? That would not make sense. But I did ask what was the experience. And the reason that made sense is because, to get employees and managers on board with, how do we want our brand to be? Not so much, are we competing with other airports? Because they are not in our vicinity anyway, but to get that sense of urgency, because once you can say we had 6% in our detractor field, and once you start to multiply that up and say, okay, if 6% are in the detractor field, how many people are that in numbers? And then you can start talking about, a possible shitstorm. So we are not in a competitive situation, but we are competing with basically our brand value. And we did have we did have an instance where a comment in the press had serious complications for us. So we used it in that way. So I think you can use, not Net Promoter Score in the recommendation or benchmark sense, but you can certainly use it in terms of and you can use others as well. Now it's just because we talked about Net Promoter Score, but you can use, any type of measurement, but you just have to angle it in a way where you can get managers and staff on board. So in a hospital, it's not about being the most recommended hospital in that area, unless there's a lot. It's about making sure that the message from the doctor gets across in a way where people don't go home and Google their diagnosis and decides their own treatment plan. So that's what the measurement is about. That's maybe you're looking more at trying to be organizationally efficient or reducing complaints or reducing effort, like customer effort. in terms of, how many times we have to talk to the same customer because they didn't get the message right or whatever. I hope that gives an
Yeah,
idea.
makes sense.
Brian.
Go on. Adora, and then Mary, I'll come to you.
Okay, so I'd like to add to what she just said, and say that this is where empathy comes in, because if it's a monopoly and you're not competing with any other institution, then you're looking at how you can help the customer to reduce the customer's pain, to look at the customer's journey, and to be very empathetic towards the customer's need. Yeah. Thank you.
And there's so much waste, isn't there, that you can identify through customer feedback or whoever participant user feedback that you can ladder back to. Actually, we're spending a lot of money over here, like because of this inefficient process. So sometimes it's just being able to listen and ask the right questions to reveal the insight behind it, that actually the root cause might be something that you can do operationally more efficiently. And stakeholders, even though they aren't there isn't a competitive advantage to having a good customer experience, can buy into that. Sorry, Mary, I jumped in. I'm supposed to be hosting. I can't help myself sometimes. Very much
we ended up giving a lot of focus to this question, and it's interesting. One of our clients was the public transportation, the MARTA. So it's the train system here, and you don't have more than one train system in a large urban area, right? So it could definitely be considered as like a concession, right? So it's the only one. But even in markets that you could see as a monopoly, the truth is that if customers' needs aren't being met, they're always going to find a way to meet those needs. So in our case, part of our metric goes around asking customers, or in this case, riders, if it's worth it to use that service or not. And what we found is that customers that didn't think it was worth it ended up getting different forms of transportation. Some of them used last mile, like a bicycle or an e-scooter. Others were opting for Uber for longer distances, or others were just buying a car. So while some cities would have a lot of users of public transportation, in our city, they don't, because it's not worth it. So in fact, identifying what the pain points are can help increase profit and revenue, even in a so-called monopolized system. Because if you make it more attractive than other alternatives, even though they're not direct competitors, you will see that when people conclude that something is worth it, they end up choosing that over an alternative. So,
yeah. But like if you're looking at something like, I don't know, the state of Denmark, there's not really a competitor unless you want to move out state. But you can still use
they can. I mean, if you take a look at like San Francisco and New York really here in the US, people just leave. People leave.
Right. But here you'd have to leave the country, and that's complicated. but in those, even in public sector companies, what you need to look at is, like, I just had a job for a city council where the people dealing with, this is not a vocabulary I have in English, but the people dealing with, you have to come in and renew your passport, and they are also the ones telling you whether or not you get, support for this, that, or the other. And so, okay, it's not interesting to look at the customer experience from a competitor point of view, but it's interesting to look at it from a customer effort perspective, because if it's too difficult to be a customer here, conflict goes up, stress goes up, sick leave for employees goes up. And so it's interesting to basically, make a competition with yourself, because it's about the well-being of the employees, and it's about being more efficient and such. And I agree with you, Mary, like even people that would say to me, but we don't have a competitor in terms of being an airport, right? But people can choose to take the car and drive to France, or they can choose to buy that new, PlayStation setup and just stay at home. So just to say, you're absolutely right. Many companies are always in a competition with someone. It's just not someone from the same type of business.
Exactly.
And my final thought on that was, this was actually working in a B2C organization, but the marketing director, one of the best female leaders I've ever encountered, would always say, it's not about that. It's about being a better us. and it's the right thing for us to do as a brand. And that kind of sentiment and cultural impact, you know, that we were always trying to be just better than ourselves and necessarily better than the competition, certainly won hearts and minds. Now it's time to finish, and we've still got so many questions in the chat, and I'm so sorry that we've not got time to answer them right now. This is only the second time we've done this, but I'm definitely learning from an audience experience point of view that we need to leave more time in the future to do this. But I'm sure the panelists will jump on the chat afterwards, and the comments will still be live, so we'll be able to come along and leave a couple of comments for you and reply to your questions. But I'd just like to thank all of you ladies for being awesome panel guests. It was so fun. I really enjoyed this session, and a huge thank you to everybody that came along and joined us in the audience today. Amazing comments, awesome interaction, and so many great perspectives being shared through the chat as well. So that's it. For anyone who's not already joined the community, just head over to our LinkedIn page if you'd like some more information. And we are hosting an open networking event on International Women's Day on March the 8th, happening online at 9 a.m. GMT. So it might work for some of your time zones. If you'd like to come along, that event is also on the LinkedIn page as well, and we'd love to see you there. So that's it from Women in CX on this version or this episode. No, we're not even on an episode. I'm getting confused with our podcast now. You know what I mean? This panel. So thank you, everybody, and I hope you have an excellent rest of the week.
It was such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Bye.